A reading from The Age of Overwhelm, Strategies for the Long Haul by Laura van Dernoot Lipsky. The more we feel overwhelmed starting to set in, the more focused and diligent we need to be with ourselves in having a plan. When we're overwhelmed, we must determine how to metabolize and internally transform whatever is arising within us. Otherwise, it erodes us, or we cause external harm, or both. As poet and activist Audre Lorde wrote, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Change starts with two considerations: what is in our collective control and what is in my individual control. There are countless things in life that are out of our individual control. Depending on our religious views, spiritual orientations, varying philosophies, our perspective on this will differ. And whether that which is out of our control is comforting or anxiety producing will also differ. But most folks agree that a lot of things are out of our control in life. It can be helpful to start by just acknowledging this.
Sometimes the story we tell ourselves is not really true. Sometimes the story others tell about us is not really true. Here on today's Heart Lift with Janelle, we are going to learn how to rewrite our story. So pick up your favorite pen and journal, grab a cup of something delicious, and start your heart-lifting journey towards living a meaningful life.
Hello and welcome to today's Heart Lift with Janelle. Today we have with us the amazing Laura van Dernoot Lipsky. Laura is really a hero of mine. She is the founder and director of the Trauma Stewardship Institute and author of Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. A must-read if you are an Enneagram 2 or you are someone who is in the profession or vocation of caring for others, which honestly is applicable to all of us. That book was a game changer for me, an enlightenment, an eye-opener. And when I found it in January this past year, oh my goodness, it really just, it just was life-giving. She also is the author of The Age of Overwhelm, Strategies for the Long Haul. And when I found that book after I found Trauma Stewardship, it just identified many characteristics of my life that needed some attention. I can be an over-carer, an over-sharer, and I can be too empathic and too caring. Yes, there is such a thing. And so I'm just so grateful to Laura for helping me understand myself better. And that's why we're here. She's going to help us today understand more about overwhelm. If you need to refresh yourself, I talked a lot about Laura's work in season 8 on episode 7, Reimagining Your Overwhelm. Heartlifters, we are living in a time of overwhelm. I'm sure it's not new under the sun, but this is the time and place in history that we're living in, and we are still on the experience and the ramifications of a global pandemic. And so Laura's work has become so important. And I just can't believe that we have her here today. It's such an honor. Laura found her calling at age 18, she writes, when she regularly spent nights volunteering in a homeless shelter. She continued working with those who had been sexually assaulted, involved with domestic violence, child abuse, natural disasters. She worked a lot after Hurricane Katrina. She's involved with a great deal of environmental injustices. And a decade into her career, she experienced what she refers to as a near psychotic break. The result of years and years of working and witnessing and being intimately involved with those who have been traumatized. A serious job hazard, we might say. And, she went on to write Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others as a result of that, because not only did others need it, she needed it herself. And that's why her work is so beautiful to me, because it comes from deep within her. She's a woman who cares deeply. And I just respect her so much for that. She's worked in both private and public sectors. And in March 2015, she delivered the first TED Talk inside a women's correctional facility. Okay, let's start this brilliant conversation with Laura once again. So honored to have Laura with us. Welcome. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm so grateful. I just really am. Laura, how on earth, I'm just curious because I love story. And how on earth did you come into this arena of being so well spoken and wise on trauma and on overwhelm? How did that unfold for you in your life?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words. So for me, it came because of my own life. So I started doing trauma work formally when I was 18, and definitely didn't know it at the time, but certainly on some level from a place of trauma mastery and trying to just understand my life and make sense of things. Mm-hmm. And then worked in primary trauma for years. And then because, we were committed and devoted and dedicated and, 18, 19, 20, 21, and we're just all consumed with what we were doing in so many different realms. I've always done trauma work as a part of this larger context and understanding of structural supremacy and systematic oppression. And so we were very devoted and dedicated, and also just zero support or communication or education around vicarious trauma and around the cumulative toll and around secondary trauma. And so as a result of that, it took a toll on me, like it takes a toll on everybody. And I just really didn't understand what was happening. And I kind of refused to get help for a long time. So one thing led to another, and I was not doing well. And so that's kind of the story I tell in Trauma Stewardship and in the TED Talk and everything, about losing my mind, coming very close to losing my mind. And then that is what prompted me to get into vicarious trauma work. So that's what I've been doing, a combination of primary trauma, vicarious trauma, and work on Overwhelm ever since.
And vicarious trauma, can you just help my listeners understand what that is? Like,
yeah, I mean, the kind of least clinical way we think about it is when you're bearing witness over time to suffering, hardship, crisis, trauma of humans, other living beings, and ecologically what's going on the planet, we know there's a cumulative toll. So it's that toll personally and professionally and individually as well as collectively.
Right. And we all have been living in that. Sadly, and we are taping this 2 days after another school shooting in Texas. That's just disarming and unsufferable to watch. And, you write about in Trauma Stewardship, which I have your chart. It sits on my desk where you give us a trauma exposure response. So I'm just going to list these things just for everyone to kind of have an understanding of what it means when you might be having a trauma exposure response, because I did not know, Laura. I do trauma work every day. And like you said, all of a sudden it just snuck up on me and I just hit it. I hit the wall. I just hit it hard. And I was like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah, of course.
A global pandemic, just so many things. And so here are some of the things you can kind of look at. Feeling helpless and hopeless. Well, I woke up that way this morning. It's again, like, what on earth can I do? Write my senators, write my congressmen. What can I do? A sense that one can never do enough. Hypervigilance, diminished creativity, inability to embrace complexity, minimizing, chronic exhaustion and physical ailments. Here in this community, we know the body keeps the score. Inability to listen, deliberate avoidance, dissociative moments, a sense of persecution, guilt, fear, anger, cynicism, and an inability to empathize, a numbing. Ooh, addictions. Yep. Grandiosity, an inflated sense of importance related in one's work. So those are just some standalones, but when you put them all together, it is really overwhelming. So if anyone listening, here's anything that goes, wow, I don't know. I just want you to get Laura's book, Trauma Stewardship. I think everybody in the world should read it right now because we are living in an age of overwhelm. Laura, how would you discern the difference between I'm just overwhelmed? What is overwhelm? What is it? What is that? And then maybe understanding, maybe I'm having a trauma response. Is there a difference in that?
It's a great question. So again, least clinical
always
way
we love it.
to think about it. Yeah. I think about it a lot in terms of, kind of putting a zoom lens on a camera and kind of zooming in as far as you can. I think about that in terms of primary trauma. So there's lots and lots of overlap, but primary trauma, this is something that, you're surviving, you're going through. It's your world comes to look like a fundamentally different place over time. So that's like that real zoomed in, like this is first person experiencing. Again, lots of overlap here. But then with vicarious trauma, if you pull the lens a little bit farther out, and again, that is, the exposure to over time, bearing witness to suffering, crisis, hardship of humans, living beings, ecologically, our planet. And that can be a limited time or it can be a long time. That can be, kind of the classic thinking of the first responders, and it can be school teachers, and it can be librarians with what librarians have going on right now. And it can be journalists. And it can also be caring for your dad who has Lou Gehrig's disease and caring for, your child who is neurodivergent and really, really struggling. So it can be, any of those things, and it can be shorter, longer term time, and it can be personal caretaking, and it can definitely be professional. And then if you pull the lens even farther back, kind of wide angle lens that you're putting on now, that's what I think about really in terms of overwhelm. So with overwhelm and, what we try to do with that second book on overwhelm was really kind of like for anybody feeling like it is hard to get out of bed in the morning, a lot going on. And, there's more clinical definition you could go into, but just that sense of just really having a hard time being able to feel like you can move forward and feeling the sense. What I talk a lot about is our nervous system and the degree to which over time we can feel saturated in our nervous system.
Oh, please talk to us about that. I think that's really what I have come to discover is, your nervous system, if it's never understood what it means to be calm or peaceful, and it's only lived in hypervigilance, what the heck do you do with that? Like, what do you do with that, Laura?
Yeah. This is something I'm talking about just all the time in my work for the last bit is, first of all, when I think about nervous system, I think about, of course we have our nervous system. And then I just think it's really helpful for people to be able to think about your nervous system as, where you live has a nervous system, and where your loved ones spend time has a nervous system. So a daycare has a nervous system. And, if your folks live in an elderly home, that has a nervous system. And I think about our workplaces have nervous systems. And I think our neighborhoods have nervous systems, and our region and our country. And
so good.
You think about your nervous system, right? And then you think about there's all these nervous systems that are interwoven. That's part of interbeing is there's all these nervous systems that are interwoven together. And so with that interwovenness and the interbeing of those nervous systems, we know that over time, as you go through your day after day after day, there's any number of things that arise in our days where our brain is registering that as perceived threat or overwhelming or something's going on. And, it's important to remember that's personal and subjective. So what might feel completely overwhelming to me, you could be chilling on any given day. It's personal and subjective, which is why we want to have a lot of humility, a lot of grace, a lot of beginner's mind, as we say in Buddhism, with each other, because it has to do with this lifetime. If you believe in intergenerational transmission of trauma, it has to do with that, epigenetics.
Yeah.
But if your brain registers as something as perceived threat or potentially overwhelming, then just like other animals, a lot of energy floods into our nervous system. Our fight, flight, freeze response is activated. all this energy comes into our nervous system, and we just don't do as well as other animals, as Peter Levine talked about. And of course, Bessel van der Kolk, other folks talk about, like, and part of that, I mean, some of it is socialization, oppression, internalized oppression with messages we get around feeling and ability to emote. Some of it is the part of our brain that helps us make meaning of things, which often is not great in humans. And then a lot of it has to do with the mid-prefrontal cortex. I mean, at least if you're over 25 and your adolescent brain has come together nicely for you, then while you'll have an instinct to flee, fight, or shut down, which is what other animals do, and if they're allowed to do that full circuit, then they fare very well. But for us, God willing, you'll have a voice telling you to hold it together. That's your executive functioning.
Yes.
So we love impulse control. But on the other hand, what happens is it means it's a braking mechanism. So it means where this energy would otherwise come out of your nervous system, just like with other animals, instead with us, it'll get stopped in your nervous system. So I think about that then in terms of, it just starts loitering and lingering and taking root and cycling and cycling and cycling in your nervous system. And so, what we talk a lot about with trauma and vicarious trauma and overwhelm is, what conditions have you created? What conditions do you have in place to be able to metabolize this? And if we don't metabolize it, then certainly with people's caretaking responsibilities and people's jobs and what's going on in the world, it doesn't take long if you're not with conditions in place to metabolize it before you just get very, very saturated. And when I do this work, it's really important anytime I'm doing work. Certainly with organizations and institutions and systems, that we look at this systemically and structurally. That I think, where we work in schools, where people learn, have a moral mandate and an ethical obligation to create sustainable environments for people to work in and live in. And so when I'm talking about creating conditions, I really go heavy there. I don't really do my work traditionally from, with respect, from the place of self-care in terms of like, okay, individuals, I need you all to figure out your own,
you're more global, down, collective.
We really want to look at the systemic and the structural pieces that lead to all this. So that's what we look at a lot and just spend a lot of time working on is first of all, how do you avoid unnecessary exposure to things that would jack up your nervous system? And then where you can't avoid unnecessary exposure, then we look at how do you metabolize this all?
Right. And that looks like what? If metabolizing means, am I managing it? Am I processing it? Am I regulating it? Can you give us like a little picture of what that might look like?
Yeah. So for me, what I think about with metabolizing is I really take it again down to the nervous system and I get really focused on the physiological, because I think
I love it.
So many folks are, so wickedly smart. People are in their heads, people get all hyper intellectual. And I think that to me, I think we just can't say enough. Again, first and foremost, you want to avoid any unnecessary exposure you can. That's really like the easiest lift, and kind of from a self-respecting place, you want to do that. So if there is any way you could not be on social media, don't be on social media. If there is a way to not, just be consumed by the news. I'm not saying like, don't work for social justice, environmental justice, social change.
Don't put your head in the sand. Right.
But also, the degree to which you're dedicated to social justice, environmental justice, social change has nothing to do with how much time you spend on these platforms or following the news. So you also want to be really, really mindful, because just humans are not that there's just no way we can be exposed to news on the level we are without numbing, distancing, disconnecting, dissociating, disintegrating, all of that. So there's a number of ways that you can avoid unnecessary exposure, whether it's relationships that are not reciprocal or news, social media, whatnot. And then where you can't, then we look at metabolizing. So some of what that looks like, it's what all of our ancestors did, right? So I talk a lot with people about, unless you're medically advised against it, get your heart rate up, break a sweat, make sure you're not in front of anything toxic as you do it, have some intention of, may anything that's accumulated in my nervous system over the last 24 hours be fully released from my nervous system. So a chance of showing up for the next 24 hours and bringing my highest self to the next 24 hours. And again, that's not, that does, you don't need to go to a gym, right? That you can chop wood, you can dance, you can play the saxophone, you can box, there's any number of things, but it's allowing your nervous system every 24-ish hours to have a full nervous system reset.
I think that's
other
brilliant.
things, of course, are being outside, Japanese long tradition of force bathing, just getting outside. And even if you don't like being outside, even if that's not your thing, I don't really care. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, all the science points to, like, you don't have to be somebody who's like, I'm a nature person. Just being outside.
Yeah, you say, look outside, be outside. Right.
It's going to help your nervous system. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's any number of things like that. So it's both a combination of avoid things that you don't have to expose yourself to that are going to harm your nervous system. And then where you can't avoid that, then we need to really look at, like, okay, how do we make sure that we are metabolizing these things?
It's just so good. It seems so simple, but yet in my practice, in my own life and in my practice, to really get that message to take root why is that so difficult? Why are we so resistant to participating in mindfulness and going outside and looking outside? I mean, I know that it's a cultural collective push. I know that we live in that. I get that. And you have an incredible, your Trauma Stewardship Institute has a beautiful, I have the big poster map for managing one's life. And then you have that crossed out and it says for managing one's day. So I keep that above my desk as well. And I'm going to let everyone know how they can get that, because it has been most helpful. And plus, you're really funny, Laura. I do want to just really applaud you for adding humor, which I know you're aware of, but you have cartoons all through your book, and you just give the perfect balance. Like, don't take this all too seriously. I don't know.
Well, that's
where that comes from?
You. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of you. Yeah, I have a wonderful mentor, Heather Anderson, and she's the one who really introduced me into. She was a hospice for a long time, and she's the one who really introduced me into. On some level, at least when we do trainings and talk with people about this, the importance of having some equanimity where you have space for the suffering and the sorrow and the pain. And also we have to pay attention to things that are beautiful and edifying. And of course, I think that pure humor is one of the most edifying things. But it was really, she was the one who first, really helped me see that in terms of from an educational standpoint. And then when I started doing these trainings and then certainly writing, it's miserable. It's just like sitting through a training on this or reading a book.
Yes.
It's like, why would you ever, it's like awful. And so that's where I have for years leaned very, 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 very heavily on the New Yorker cartoons. And
they're well-timed. They're right there at the right time. And right when you think, then you put one there and it's like, okay. All right. I can laugh here, because I think a lot of times in a state of overwhelm, especially in a state of overwhelm, we really forget to have fun. We don't know. And I feel guilty if I'm happy. I feel guilty if my life is going well. I think that has a lot to do with the way I grew up, for sure. My family of origin, alcoholism, and all of that. But also when there's so much tragedy coming across the news and all of these systems that we have in our presence all day long, I think we just forget that we can actually step away. And that is chapter 8 in your book, The Age of Overwhelm. And I found this one, Laura, to be the hardest. I'm a highly empathic, highly sensitive human being. Now, that might be just an excuse. I'm not sure. But, how do we know, if I see, they don't call them beggars, panhandlers, or people on the side of the road, I get overwhelmed. Okay, that's just one small little way. When to step away. You write, once we deepen our insight and awareness into how our lives are currently going, if the way we're spending our time is edifying or eroding, we have a final set of considerations to evaluate. A central tenet of our ability to sustain is being able to discern when to approach, when to maintain, and when to call it a wrap. So you're saying it's okay that sometimes we can walk away. And what does that mean?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I get very, very concrete here in terms of what's not an option to me is that any harm comes to folks as we are trying to help. And I mean, obviously we don't want harm coming in any way to the folks who are trying to serve, whether that again is like your child as a parent or your partner if they have cancer or anything. Like, I mean, you just, the person we're trying to help can receive a tremendous amount of harm for us, even if we would never intend that, but just because we're completely over deployed, overextended, et cetera. So we certainly want to keep an eye on it for that reason. And then the other thing that I just see so much for caregivers, but certainly for folks who do this work in these fields, is that the first place we're going to see harm generally, if you're a nurse, if you're a school teacher, you know, if you're an activist, if you're a journalist, if you're in the military, if you're a public defender, it's not going to be the folks you're serving. The first place we're going to see harm is going to be in one's own health, because most of us who come in to do this work, the degree of dedication, the degree of devotion, the degree of all of that is so extreme that what we're going to do is we're going to put our heads down, suck it up, keep our mouth shut. And, you know, this is like kind of field after field. There's been all this misinformation that if you're cool enough and tough enough and committed and you care, you're going to suck it up. And so a lot of us do that. Right. And then the first place we see harm will be in our own physical health. The second place we see harm will be our own depression, our own anxiety, all of that. The second level that we see harm will be in our loved one relationships, which I think, you know, probably all of your listeners can relate to. Loved ones saying, you know, I don't know how they say you're so good at what you do at work because you suck at home, you know, like where mostly that, like, we do not give our best self to our loved ones. The third place we see harm usually is our colleagues. Like, we can do great work in our community, but, you know, we gossip, we talk trash about people. And then by the time anybody is not really bringing their highest self to their job, I just always think about it like a mountaineering accident where there are all these indicators we really, 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 really needed to pay attention to. And so in terms of stepping away, it's kind of like the least you can do for the people you care about, whether we're talking about caretaking in your personal life or on the job, because it just, you end up causing harm, right?
Or even mothering to me, like over parenting, over mothering.
For sure. 100%. Right. So when we're talking about stepping away, that's the responsible thing to do. That's the accountable thing to do. And for many of us, obviously it's hard to do that. I mean, because of everything, because we care and we're dedicated and devoted. And also because a lot of us, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of us come into these professions so we can focus on other people and not be present with ourselves. You know,
good Lord, so that is so true.
Trauma mastery piece there too. You know, so there's lots of reasons why it's hard to step away, but I just think it's essential that we don't get caught up in the martyrdom of just like, oh, you're so amazing, I don't know how you do it. Look at you just pushing through everything, ignoring yourself. And I mean, that just, it never, ever, ever ends well. And I think culturally it's problematic. And I certainly think it's absolutely awful when workplaces endorse martyrdom.
When I read about trauma mastery, the lights all started going off, like sirens were going off in my head. So I definitely want to bring more to the table about that in the future, but you can read all about that in Laura's book, Trauma Stewardship. But I wanted to know, as we're closing here, because, you know how I could just talk to you forever, but I'm going to honor your time. Beautiful Laura. In chapter 8, you write about a story about you and your husband at a family reunion. And it's just a couple paragraphs in the book, but I think it has a beautiful takeaway for our listeners. And I can remind you about it if you need it, because I know when we write a book and we're moving on, sometimes we forget the stories. But it's about scuba diving, and a little something happened between you and your husband. And I thought that could be a good takeaway for our audience today.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a number of threads there, so I'm not sure which one you want to take up on. But I mean, you tell me what you found.
You were trying, because I'll read just the benefit of this was revealed. I'll read this. If it's a small break, you need to keep on keeping on. Give yourself some time and space to just do nothing. Step out for a minute. The benefit of this was revealed to me during a family reunion. Lots of people around, complex dynamics at play. You've been there. So in this particular moment, I was trying to get my partner's attention to help both tend to the adult situation at hand and help wrangle the many children running around. Okay. You're like giving him this look and he wasn't picking up on it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I was struck by something you said earlier in terms of like, you're really empathic and you care a lot and like, and kind of the trauma mastery that might bring you to some of the work you're doing and everything. And I think it's something to have some self-awareness of ourselves, that there are people like my partner where the glass is always half full. Things just are able to roll, like a wax on a duck's back. Just things are able to roll off. Like,
so enviable.
Absolute opposite of me. Right. And that's how he rolls, and that's how he goes through life. And there's, it's not, I mean, I think for all of us, there's a light shadow dynamic of, any way that we all roll through the life it's not good or bad, but like light shadow dynamic. And so, but that's, part of his light is assuming well and glass half full and all of that. And that is just that's not how I roll. And so I think that, one of the things that we want to pay attention to, Buddhism talks so beautifully about wake up to the present moment. And I think this idea of like being very honest with ourselves about, again, that light shadow dynamic, not good or bad, but what do I have in this moment? What do I have in my life? What is nature, nurture, however you want to think about it? But what do I want to build on? And then, as Thich Nhat Hanh says so beautifully, cradle your suffering, the shadow side of things, the places that we struggle, the places that can be challenging. Thich Nhat Hanh would always talk about, you've got to cradle your suffering. You've got to figure out a way to care for those places. So, with what you were sharing earlier in terms of being empathetic and caring so much, and, that there's a reason so many of us come into this work, like that is our constitution, that is our orientation. And then you put on top of that trauma, that those of us who have survived trauma, many of us come into this work because we are definitely trying to reconcile things. So again, it's not a bad or good thing, but I think just having that awareness and then knowing, then how are you going to, in a very responsible way and a very accountable way, hopefully with humor along the way as well, but how are you going to tend to that? Like, what does that look like in terms of your personal life? What does that look like in terms of how you spend your time, like where you volunteer? And how does it look, what does it look like in terms of how you decide to pay the bills? And I think it's, again, nothing bad or good, or taking it out of that binary, of course, but just understanding like what, the question that I encourage people to ask, like some part of a contemplative practice, which can be, you don't have to have to be a dramatic thing. You can do it when you're walking your dog or making sandwiches for your kids, but it's just like every day asking yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I caretaking the way I'm caretaking? Why am I doing the volunteer work I'm doing? Why am I spending time in this job? How am I spending my time? And, Pema Chodron says death is certain and your time of death is uncertain. How do you want to spend your time?
That's right.
And I think about that all the time. Like I always think about that, and certainly right now in life a lot.
Again, Mary Oliver, what are you going to do with your one wild life?
Absolutely.
What are you going to do with it? And I had a woman challenge me last week, and I was like, oh, I heard this podcast today, and it's like, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? And she goes, let me just challenge you here. What do you want your life to feel like? What do you want to feel like in 5 years? And I was like, well, that's a shift. So I just think what you're urging us, Laura, what your story tells us is that we can give ourselves permission. Like maybe I need to give I'm one of those personalities that has to give herself permission to walk away or to step away or not join a group or whatever that I know is going to cause me overwhelm, to be very cautious, to be very intentional and strategic. About where I place my hand in life and where I place my heart and mind in my work. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's just, there's no shortage of ways that we can be of service and help repair the world and all of that. And so I think I get very practical in terms of cost benefit of just like, this is all fleeting. This is all impermanent, and so what do you want and to what benefit? Where can we bring our highest selves? And, you're talking about overwhelm, and we were asked to start a podcast for a long time. And I just didn't do it for a long time because I didn't imagine we'd have anything to contribute the landscape, but we ended up doing it. And the podcast is all about overwhelm. It's all about navigating overwhelm. It's all about interrupting isolation around overwhelm. It's all about strategies for overwhelm. And we have everybody on there from, like Pulitzer Prize winning journalists to the head of mental health for the NBA to activists to, ACLU folks to
so
and a lot of
exciting.
young people. It's really, really important to me that we are supporting adolescents and young adults. So every other week is dedicated to them. And but to your point, it's just any support we can have around Overwhelm, I think is really, really meaningful.
Yes. And your husband, I think, shared with you about buddy breathing. So that was just kind of where I was heading with that, that there's a practice in scuba diving that if someone you're diving with is running out of air in their tank, you pass your regulator back and forth, buddy breathing. So across the room, he kind of did that, kind of played charades with you for a minute. And he was just like looking at you and telling you, he's giving you some of his breath. And I just think that's a very beautiful practice to remember that you need to have a support system around you in life that feeds you. We don't heal in isolation, we heal in community. And to make sure that you have people around you that, are helping you buddy breathe. I think that's just, I took that away from the book. It was very important to me. And so now across the room, we're kind of, my husband and I are kind of doing that. So Laura, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really, really a treat for me. So thank you so much.
Oh, I can't wait to give everyone all of your information. We'll have all that in the show notes. And so everybody can get their charts and their beautiful posters and put them over their desk or on the refrigerator for the whole family to see. And may you just continue to take care of yourself as you take care of so many. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take the best of care. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Heartlifters, what a privilege to have Laura here with us. Just such a privilege. I want to make sure that you can connect with her because I know how much I have needed her words and wisdom, and I suspect you will too. So you can find Laura at www.traumastewardship.com. And her new podcast that she mentioned is called Future Tripping. And I learned something new, that future tripping is an actual clinical term. And it means to stop worrying about something that hasn't even happened yet. That is so fantastic. So Heartlifters, we are adding that to our realm of study and realm of practice, that we're going to stop future tripping. Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. I think we're going to need a whole episode on that in the future. So stay tuned. Until then, be sure to take care of yourself. Because I know you're taking care of so many in your spheres of influence. So take care of yourself.
Thanks for listening today. It was great having you here. For even more great content and resources, please join the Stronger Everyday online community at JanelleRaridan.com. Always remember, you, my friend, have value, worth, and dignity.